So we're going to start up where we left off last time, where we used input to set state, and today we're going to set API, or set state to use the API. So let's look at where we were at. I'm going to reload this app. So before we had this application that returned a greeting, we're going to change this around to hit our SWAPI API, or Star Wars API. So I'm going to start off by adding a new file that will make the API call for us. And we're going to call this SWAPI service in camel case. That'll be a JS file. And so normally you would need to npm install --save request and request-promise. I have already done that locally in this project, so I won't be doing that here. So I need to import request promise, import rp from, and now we're going to say request-promise. And now we are going to create a function to make the API call. So export, and then we're going to call it a function. You're free to use ES6 arrow syntax here. Doesn't matter to me one way or another. And we're going to call this getPerson, and this will take an argument of the ID, which would be an integer. So now we're going to return, and we're going to say we're going to turn a promise from request promise, and this will take a bunch of arguments inside of our squiggly brackets. So the first is going to be the method, I believe. And that's going to be a get, as Alex pointed out earlier. And then our URI is going to be https://swapi.co/api/people. And then we're going to append the ID to that. And then we have to tell it that we want it to be JSON. So JSON true. And that should be about it for the getPerson. Now we're going to go back into our app.js. And I'm going to change some of this code around. So right now, this button would restore the default name. So we're just going to get rid of this completely. And we're going to have our standard React Strap button. And it's going to be a standard one because it's not going to be a dangerous button. And we'll rename this to queryPerson. Get rid of set default and change name here. And now we're going to call a new function, and that will be called getPerson from SWAPI. And before we do that, we have to change our input to set the ID. So name is going to be empty by default. We'll set ID in our state to default to 1, which I'm pretty sure is Luke Skywalker for those interested. And now this button is going to have a onClick method. So onClick equals, and then this is going to be our JSX JavaScript syntax. That's going to call this.getPerson from SWAPI. And that should be it for that. And now we need to make a setID function. And that will just say this.setState. And that will take in the event pass that's emitted from the input on change. So ID is going to get changed to the event.target.value. And then on change, we'll call setID. Now, in order for both of these functions to interact with state, what do I need to do? we need to bind it to this. So I'm going to be lazy and just steal this one. Then I'll copy this again. Fix my syntax while I'm at it. And get person from Swappy. So now both these methods, functions, are able to interact with this and state. Next thing that we need to do is we need to import our code from the service file. So we're going to say, let's see, keep it up here, import, we're going to call it get person from / and Swappy service. And I'll make sure that I've renamed this correctly, get person. Yeah. So now inside of get person from Swappy, we'll call the get person method that we have. And that is going to take one argument, which is going to be the ID, which we can retrieve from the state here. So we'll say this .state.id, and this function returns a promise, so we'll say .then, and we'll call the return object person, do ES6 fat arrow syntax. So we want to set more state items from this response now. So I'm going to give it a couple more fields. So we have name, and then we'll say gender and hair color. So when this promise resolves, we'll set state. And now we response.name for the name. Let's see. Then gender will be person.gender. And then hair color will be person.hair_color, since that's the way the API returns it.
Why is there response not person?
Because I made a typo. And as usual, if I make syntax errors, saves everyone time if you point them out. And just for fun, I'll say console.log and just display everything in the console that gets returned back for person. And I'm going to go ahead and comment out the child component for now. And let's see what happens when we run this. So we'll run it. I'm in the root of this folder, and we'll npm start. So I'll give it an ID of 5, and we'll inspect and go to the console. Now, React is very good about giving you useful comments in the console. Hit query person, and it shows me the output of my console.log. So layout Organa and all of our information. So when I am saying person.haircolor or person.name, I'm actually looking at the response from the API before I start typing them out. I had just done this previously. So like here's the name, here's how I knew that was _color for hair color. Does that make sense? So, and then before I carry on, we'll add a little bit of CSS to make this less ugly. I am not a CSS expert. I can do a little bit. So I'm going to add a .query button to the app.css, saying that I have a class that's going to be called query button. And I'm just going to say margin-top. So it's going to add a little bit of space. And we'll say 5 pixels. Now we'll go back into that. And we have our button. And since we are in React, we're going to say class name instead of class equals query-button. And you'll see up here that, let's see, I think that React automatically pulls in the CSS from the same named CSS as the app, or as the JS file. That's part of the component. But let's look and see if this, so now there's a little bit of a gap on here, small thing. So now we want to continue on and make some information render from this API. So we'll go back to app.css, and we'll say for now we're done with child component completely. We'll make this a single component app. I'll get into rendering other components later. So we are going to have some more divs in here. And like we did on the board, we will have name, and then this .state.name, gender, this .state.gender, and hair color. This .state.hair color. It looks like, I think I actually did it camel case when I declared it in state. Yeah. But good catch. Now let's re-render this. And so now we have this empty code. So remember, I set the default value to 1 if we don't include it in here. And there we go. Change this to 5. And something else I forgot to mention is that when you use text boxes, it seems like with modern styling, it's kind of tacky to put a label to the left of it in a lot of forms. So instead of doing that, what would you do, Maddie? Okay. Just putting you on the spot. I'm going to give it an attribute of placeholder here, and I'm going to call this person ID. So now the page will re-render, and it kind of tells you what it expects, and as soon as you type something, it goes away. Or as soon as you make it clear it out, it comes back. Is that correct, Andrew, or should they use labels on the left? Okay. So last in this presentation is I don't want these divs to show up if I don't have data, because that kind of looks tacky, ugly. So we're going to do some more magic with state and React in here. So I'm going to add another key value to our state, and I'm going to call it loaded, and that's going to be false. And now we have these 3 divs in here. Rather than rendering them in the return, I'm going to declare them as a variable in my render. So I'm going to call swappy let swappy output equals
Space after what?
thank you. And it might yell me that I don't have a parent. Yep. So I need a div surrounding all of these divs. Because React always wants one item to return. And then prettier with React Babel will make it look better for us. So now we are going to return swappy output as the variable here inside of our code. So, looks like it wants to do it that way. Swappy output is not defined. And 46. That's because I did Pascal case. And I should have noticed that because it was kind of dulled out color, but now it tells me that's active since it's back to its usual bright color. And it's rendered again, yet it's still there. So now what I'm going to do is something that we did earlier in this class, a ternary operator, just for the fastest line, fastest writing of the code. A if statement would be adequate as well. So I'm going to say if this dot state dot, and I'm going to change this from loaded to is loaded here, just so it makes a little bit more sense. This dot state dot is loaded, and this in itself is a Boolean expression. So if it's loaded, we're going to return this div. Else, or colon, we're going to return nothing. So now let's look at the page. We'll say we want Leia again. We got nothing. So now we have one more thing that we need to change in here. So when we're setting state, we've set the values. I also want to tell state that this is loaded now. And we'll set that to true. So as soon as the promise resolves successfully, we will tell React that it's okay to display this. Yeah, I messed up something in here because it's not showing me my JavaScript response in the console. So we'll hop. Oh, wait. Hey, I had a breakpoint in there for some reason. So it looks like everything was okay. So we'll reload it again, just so we have a good example of it. So let's pick a number, Allie.
16.
60?
16.
16. And we will query that. And we have... Is this... I bet this is Jabba the
That's
Hutt.
Jabba the Hutt.
Let's look in the console just to verify that. Is there a species? 5. Yep, it's Jabba the Hutt. So now, let's say that we want a little bit more information, and we want to figure out what kind of species he is. I I'm going to go back into our code and add a species name in here. And we're going to set species name. We'll set that to blank, and then I'm going to make another one called species loaded and set that to false. So we're going to chain promises in here now. So that gives us an API call and its response. Oh, I already closed it. That gives you a direct link to the species. So I'm going to add one more function to our SWAPI service, and we're just going to call it export function make SWAPI call. And we're going to pass in the URI that's given directly to us from SWAPI. So that will return a request promise again. I'm just going to copy and paste everything out of here. And then I'm going to change the URI to the URI param. And I've exported that, so now I'll go back into my app.js and I'm going to import the other method from this, make SWAPI call. So now we call get person, and this resolves, and we're able to set the state of all of this. And now we're going to, inside of the promise resolution, we're going to say make SWAPI call, and we're going to say person dot, I think it's species. And then since this is a promise within a promise, we're going to say species is going to be the response. And then this dot set state. What did I call this? Okay, species name. Do I still have my paste in here? Nope. Do I still have my console log? Well, here we go. Okay, so that's going to be name as well. And that'll be species.name. And then we're going to say that the species has loaded as well. And set that to true. And just for fun, we'll console.log that. So now we're going to go back into our render here, and I'm going to add one more variable called species output. And we're going to do a ternary gun. This dot state dot is. Am I?
Yep.
Wondering why everything was going red. Species loaded. Then we're going to return a div, and that is just going to say species. And then in JSX syntax for JavaScript, this dot state dot species name, and that returns a div. Otherwise, we're returning nothing. And then after SWAPI output, we'll put species output. See if this renders for us. So we'll go back to good old Luke. And I did something wrong. Invalid URI /. So let's go back to the console. Luke Skywalker. And href. So it didn't like our URI that we passed in. Person.species. So what I would do now is I would go into our sources and put a breakpoint right here. And I'm going to reload this. Alright, and I'm going to look at the person object. What's that? Ah, thank you. So we need to say 0. That's an interesting design choice for a species, unless people are able to be multiple species. Yeah. Species 0 dot name, I believe. Nope.
It was the wrong. Yeah. Then you again.
Ah, yeah. Here. Species 0. Alright, one more time. Refresh the page. Alright, so now it gave us a species of human. So since we had a promise within a promise, it grabbed all of this data first. Then it grabbed the URI from this data, made another API call and a nested promise, and returned that data. So that's what we're going to cover today. I'll push up my code and I will post this video. So have a good weekend.